Hello, everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. The book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are the 13th and 14th book of the New Testament. The New Testament has 5 sections: the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Pauline epistles, the general epistles, and the book of Revelation. The Gospels contain the life, ministry, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Acts of the Apostles give a historical account of the growth and spread of the Christian church. The Pauline epistles are a collection of letters written by Paul to different churches during his time, and the general epistles are letters written by other leaders such as Peter, John, and Jude to different churches. Finally, the book of Revelation gives a picture of how the story of the world will end with Jesus returning to earth to restore and to reign on it. The book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is a part of the Pauline epistles section of the New Testament. Let me go over the historical context of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. The city of Thessalonica was founded in Macedonia, which was the area that covered the northern half of the Greek peninsula around 315 BC. It was founded by Cassander, who named Thessalonica after his wife, who was the half-sister of Alexander the Great. By the time Paul visited Thessalonica, its residents found pride in their noble history. We see in Acts chapter 17, verses 6 through 9, where charges of inciting insurrection against Rome happened in Thessalonica. Thessalonica was not only an important city politically, but also economically. One of Rome's major east-west trade routes passed through Macedonia, and Paul and his co-workers traveled through Thessalonica as they moved from Philippi to Athens. When Paul arrived in Thessalonica, he came with Silas and Timothy. Silas was Paul's partner on his second missionary journey and was chosen after Paul separated from Barnabas. We read of Silas when he was sent to Antioch after the Council of Jerusalem to communicate the decision about Gentiles joining Christianity. Later, Silas was associated with the apostle Peter as evidence of 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 12. Timothy first appears when Paul met him at Lystra and had him circumcised so that he could join him on his second missionary journey. Timothy became closely associated with Paul, as we've seen for Paul's writing of 2 Corinthians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Philemon. Paul speaks warmly of Timothy and refers to him as his spiritual son. So as Paul entered Thessalonica with Silas and Timothy, he started a church there. As a result of his preaching in the synagogue, Jews and Gentiles were converted. However, some Jews who had rejected Paul's message wanted to drive him out from the city by inciting a mob to charge Paul and his co-workers with crimes against the empire. So Paul and Silas eventually left to Berea to escape persecution. Up to this point, Paul had very little to encourage him. In 4 successive events, there had been discouragement. A promising beginning had been followed by disruption in Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. He had little success in Athens as well. However, when the messengers came from Thessalonica, they brought a report of the faithfulness of Paul's converts that encouraged him. His spirits were lifted, and he gave himself much more energetically to his preaching, as evidenced in Acts chapter 18, verse 5. Out of his lifted heart, Paul wrote his first letter to the Thessalonians. Then Paul sent 2nd Thessalonians to the church in response to a report he received about the church. We don't know exactly when Paul wrote the second letter and how he sent it, but we do know that Paul maintained an ongoing concern for the church he founded at Thessalonica. During the months Paul ministered in Athens and Corinth, Timothy made at least 2 round trips as Paul's representative to the church at Thessalonica. This was a significant act, since each trip required Timothy traveling about 1,000 miles. Let me go over the purpose of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Paul wrote these letters because of his care and concern for the church that he founded. He seemed satisfied with the progress the Thessalonians had made. However, he wanted to address the problem of persecution and to encourage the Thessalonian believers. Both 1st and 2nd Thessalonians begin and end with a concern for peace. Peace with unbelievers is desirable, and Paul encouraged behavior that would win the respect of outsiders. Paul, though, wants to remind the Thessalonians that peace with all people is not possible living in a post-Genesis 3 world. In fact, Paul warned the church that persecution was inevitable in both 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So if believers were to have peace, it must somehow be found even while experiencing persecution. It was this kind of peace that Paul wanted to bring to the Thessalonians, and the way he would do this is by placing their suffering within the context of eternity. You see, both letters to the Thessalonians deal with the topic of eschatology. Eschatology refers to the study of end times. Several major passages in these letters comment directly about God's plan in the final days of earth. Based on these passages, we see that eschatology was presented with a purpose, not to argue over the details of how the world will end, but to encourage believers to persevere during persecution. In other words, the purpose of eschatology is to comfort believers. Did you know that? In fact, look at how Paul comforts them grieving over death in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by the word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Later, Paul encourages the readers that those who are persecuting them would experience a just punishment. Then we see how Paul warns his readers to not listen to false teachings that have crept into the church, but to stand firm in the gospel and their understanding of how the world will end. Thus, it appears that Paul's teaching about eschatology were not given as new information, but echoes back to what he already taught them. Instead, he reminds them about what they know regarding Christ's second coming to encourage them during persecution and give them hope even when they suffer unjustly by others. Thank you to today's sponsor, On Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the book of Colossians, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. And until next time, see you.